Detective Mark Lawson had always prided himself on living a life built on stability and dedication. For over 10 years, he had served in the police force, rising through the ranks with his sharp instincts and ability to solve even the most complex cases. Mark had earned a reputation for being calm under pressure, always focused, and always just a step ahead. But the case he had been working on lately wasn't anything like what he was used to. It wasn't a murder or a robbery or anything that could be solved with quick thinking or careful investigation. It was a routine request that would soon shatter his perfect world. At home, things were just as he imagined, calm, happy, and filled with love. Mark had a beautiful wife, Jasmine, a woman who had been his partner in life for as long as he could remember. Together, they had built a strong family. Their 2 kids, Tyler and Emily, were the center of their universe. Tyler, at 8, was already showing signs of being a smart, curious child who always asked a million questions. Emily, at 6, was full of energy, laughter, and mischief. Their home was always filled with sounds of joy and love, the kind of home Mark had always dreamed of. Are you ready to find out what happens next? To discover the shocking secrets, the betrayals, and the unexpected twist that will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about Mark's life. Stay tuned and don't miss the next part of this emotional, suspenseful story. Like and subscribe to find out how Mark's perfect world is about to crumble. You won't believe the shocking truth that's waiting for him. Every day after work, he'd come home to the familiar sight of Jasmine waiting for him, her warm smile lighting up the house. Tyler and Emily would rush to greet him, their tiny arms wrapped around his legs, excited to have him home. They'd eat dinner together, Jasmine's cooking filling the air with comforting scents. The family was everything to Mark, and he couldn't imagine life without them. But there were times when Mark felt that nagging sense of perfection, the nagging thought that everything seemed just a little too ideal. There was no real reason for it, but sometimes Mark couldn't shake the feeling that life, especially his, was too smooth, like a well-oiled machine, ticking along without a hitch. Maybe it was just the demands of his job, or maybe it was the years of constant focus on providing and protecting, but something inside him made him feel like he might be on the edge of something he didn't quite understand. He didn't know then that this feeling was the first whisper of a storm on the horizon. One day, Mark was called into work for a routine meeting. It wasn't anything out of the ordinary, just an update on a case involving local crime. But at the end of the meeting, something unusual happened. His department asked him to take a DNA test. It was part of a new procedure, something the department was rolling out for all officers in light of an ongoing investigation. It wasn't personal. It wasn't even a big deal. Just a simple DNA test. They explained it as a part of keeping everything in check, ensuring transparency. Mark thought little of it. He didn't even question why they needed it. He was a law-abiding officer with nothing to hide. The test was quick, easy, and completely routine. Mark didn't think about it much afterward. He returned home, kissed his kids, shared a quiet evening with Jasmine, and went to bed. Life went on as usual. But something was about to happen that would change everything. A few days later, a letter arrived at their doorstep. It was addressed to Mark, from the lab that had handled his DNA test. Mark opened it casually, not expecting anything strange. What he found inside made his heart stop. He stared at the words on the paper, blinking several times to make sure his eyes weren't deceiving him. The results, which he thought would be harmless, were anything but. The DNA test had revealed something shocking, something that Mark could never have prepared for. His 2 children, Tyler and Emily, were not his biological kids. The paper felt heavy in his hands, the words burning into his mind as he reread them. Was this some kind of mistake? A mix-up at the lab? He could barely breathe, let alone understand what was happening. His mind was a whirlwind of confusion. How could this be true? These were his kids. He had raised them, loved them, and taken care of them for years. They were his world. How could this test be right? There had to be some mistake. The more he tried to reason with himself, the more the question lingered. If they weren't his biological children, then whose were they? Mark's heart began to race. He didn't know what to do. He ran through every possible explanation, but none made sense. His thoughts turned to Jasmine. How could she not have told him? Had she kept a secret from him for all these years? But why? And if Tyler and Emily weren't his, then who were they really? As Mark's mind raced, his love for Jasmine was overtaken by confusion. The woman he had married, the mother of his children, had she been hiding something this huge from him all along? What was going on? Could he trust her? Could he trust the life they had built together? That night, as he sat alone in the darkness, holding the DNA test results, he made a decision. He had to confront Jasmine. He had to know the truth, no matter how painful it might be. But little did Mark know, the truth was far more complicated and far more devastating than he could ever have imagined. The days after the DNA test results came back were a blur for Detective Mark Lawson. He tried to focus on his work, to push the thoughts of the test out of his mind. But the more he tried to ignore it, the more it consumed him. Every time he saw Tyler and Emily, his heart sank. They were his children in every sense of the word. They called him Dad, and he had spent years watching them grow. He loved them fiercely. He couldn't imagine life without them. But now, the DNA test was telling him something entirely different. It was as if the ground beneath his feet had been ripped away, and he was left with nothing but questions. Mark couldn't understand how this could be. It didn't make sense. He had trusted Jasmine completely. She was his partner in every way. They had built a life together. They had gone through all the highs and lows, the good times and the bad, side by side. They had shared everything. How could she have kept this secret from him? He thought about the moment they first met, the way Jasmine had smiled at him, the way she had supported him through difficult cases and long nights. They had always talked about having a family, and when Tyler was born, followed by Emily a couple of years later, it felt like everything had fallen into place. Their kids were their future, the reason they worked so hard. Now, everything about that life felt uncertain. It was as if he had been living in a dream, and the truth had just woken him up from it. One evening, after his shift, Mark couldn't take it anymore. He had to confront Jasmine. He needed answers, and he couldn't go another day living in the dark. He knew the conversation wouldn't be easy, but it was the only way to understand what had really happened. Jasmine was in the kitchen when he walked in, humming softly as she stirred something in a pot on the stove. It was a scene Mark had seen countless times before, but tonight, everything felt different. He stood in the doorway, watching her, his heart heavy with the weight of the questions he had to ask. She didn't notice him at first, her back turned as she focused on dinner. But then she turned, smiling at him, and her smile faltered when she saw the expression on his face. "Mark, you okay?" she asked softly, concern filling her voice. Mark didn't answer right away. He walked into the kitchen, his footsteps slow and deliberate. He took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm of emotions inside of him, but it was hard. He had spent days trying to make sense of everything, but nothing seemed to make sense anymore. "Jasmine," he said, his voice tight, "we need to talk about the DNA test." Jasmine froze. Her hand trembled slightly as she set the spoon down, her face going pale. She knew what was coming. Mark could see the panic in her eyes, the way her lips parted, but no words came out. "Mark, I don't know what to say," she whispered, taking a step back. "I never wanted you to find out this way." Mark's chest tightened. The words he had been holding in for days were finally coming out, but they didn't feel right. It wasn't just about the DNA test. It was about the years of silence, the secrets, the betrayal that Mark had been blind to. His mind was spinning, and he felt a lump rise in his throat. "Jasmine, how could you do this?" His voice cracked. "How could you lie to me for so long? For years, I've been raising Tyler and Emily, loving them like they were my own. I thought I was their father. I thought we were a family." Jasmine's eyes filled with tears, and she covered her mouth with her hand, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. "I didn't want to hurt you, Mark. I never meant for this to happen." Will Mark find the strength to rebuild his family, or will the secrets of the past tear them apart forever? Stay tuned and don't miss the next part of this emotional journey. Like and subscribe, and get ready to dive deeper into the mystery of Mark's family. The truth is only just beginning to unfold, and the shockwave from this discovery will leave you breathless. Mark shook his head, his anger mixing with confusion. "Then what happened? How could I have missed this? Why didn't you tell me the truth?" Jasmine stepped closer to him, her face full of regret. She took a deep breath, her hands trembling as she wiped away a tear. "It was a mistake, Mark. A long time ago, before we met, I was with someone else. It was one time, just one time, and it was over. I never thought it would affect our lives. But when I found out I was pregnant, I couldn't tell you the truth. I was afraid. I thought you'd leave me. I couldn't lose you, Mark. I couldn't lose our family." Mark felt like the room was closing in around him. His chest tightened, and his heart ached with a mix of disbelief and betrayal. "You were with someone else. Who, Jasmine? Who is the father? Is that why this is all happening?" Jasmine hesitated, her eyes lowering to the floor. She didn't speak for a long moment, as if the weight of the truth was too heavy to bear. Finally, she looked up at him, her voice barely a whisper. "His name is Derek Stone." Mark's breath caught in his throat. Derek Stone. The name hit Mark like a slap in the face. Derek Stone was a man from Mark's past, a man Mark had once arrested for drug dealing and assault, a criminal who had spent time in prison. Mark had put Derek behind bars years ago, and he had never thought about him again. But now this name was coming back to haunt him, and it was connected to his children. Mark stepped back, his mind spinning. He could barely comprehend what he was hearing. Derek Stone, the man I arrested, the criminal. Jasmine nodded, her face filled with sorrow. "Yes, Mark. I was young, and I made a terrible mistake. I didn't know what to do. When I found out I was pregnant, I knew I couldn't tell you the truth. I knew you'd leave me, and I couldn't lose you." Mark's head was spinning. The emotions were too much to process. Derek Stone, the man who had caused so much pain and trouble in Mark's life, was the father of the children he had raised as his own. How could Jasmine have kept this secret for all these years? How could she have lied to him like this? "Jasmine, how could you do this?" Mark whispered, his voice breaking. "You've been hiding this from me, lying to me every day. And for what? To keep me in the dark, to keep our family together." "I didn't want to lie to you, Mark," Jasmine pleaded, her voice filled with desperation. "I love you. I always have. I never wanted this to happen. I made a mistake, but it was just one mistake, and I couldn't lose everything." Mark stood there in silence, trying to process it all. His world felt like it was crumbling. The family he had known for so long, the life he had built, it was all built on a lie. He didn't know what to do. He didn't know if he could forgive Jasmine, or if he could continue living the life they had together. "I need time," Mark said, his voice distant. "I don't know what to think anymore." Jasmine collapsed into a chair, her sobs loud and uncontrollable. "I understand. I'll give you all the time you need, Mark. I just want you to know I love you, and I never wanted to hurt you." Mark left the room, his heart heavy with the burden of the truth. He didn't know what to do next. The questions were endless, and the answers were unclear. He loved Tyler and Emily like they were his own, but now he had to face the possibility that everything he thought he knew about his family was a lie. Could he forgive Jasmine? Could he move past this betrayal? The road ahead seemed impossible to navigate. Mark felt like the walls were closing in on him. The weight of Jasmine's confession seemed to hang in the air, thick and suffocating. His mind was reeling. Derek Stone, The name echoed in his head, a reminder of a past he thought he had left behind. Derek wasn't just any man from his past. He was a criminal, a dangerous figure Mark had put behind bars. But now, Jasmine was telling him that Derek was the biological father of his children. Tyler and Emily, his kids, the children he had raised, loved, and cared for, were connected to a man who had caused so much trouble in his life. He stared at Jasmine, his heart pounding in his chest. He couldn't process it. Everything he thought he knew about his family felt like it had been ripped away in an instant. How could she have kept this from him? How could she have kept such a monumental secret for so long? Jasmine, why didn't you tell me? Mark's voice was hoarse, the words coming out slower than he intended. Why keep something like this from me? Was our entire life built on lies? Jasmine's face was streaked with tears, her hands trembling in her lap. She opened her mouth to speak but couldn't find the words. She was ashamed, and Mark could see it. I was scared, Mark. I didn't know what to do. I thought if you knew the truth, you'd leave me. You'd leave us, she whispered, choking on her words. I couldn't lose our family. Mark felt a deep pang in his chest. He wanted to believe her, to understand. But the truth was so much darker than he could have imagined. The woman he loved, the woman he trusted more than anyone in the world, had kept something this big from him. For years, he had been raising children that weren't his, children that were connected to a man who had hurt people, a man he had put away in jail. I don't know what to say, Jasmine, Mark said, his voice cold and distant. I thought everything was perfect. I thought you were perfect. We were perfect. He turned away from her, pacing back and forth, the tension in the room building with every step. How could I have missed this? How could I not have seen it? Jasmine's eyes followed him as he moved around the room. She couldn't look away from him, as if waiting for him to say something, anything, that might make sense of all this. Mark, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I never wanted you to find out this way. I thought I could keep it buried. But now I know I can't keep hiding it from you. You deserve the truth. Mark stopped pacing and looked at her, his eyes filled with pain. The truth? What truth, Jasmine? That you've been living with this secret for all these years. That you lied to me and let me raise children that weren't mine. What am I supposed to do with this, Jasmine? How am I supposed to trust you again? Jasmine's face crumpled, the guilt washing over her like a tidal wave. She was sobbing now, her shoulders shaking with the weight of what she had done. I never wanted to hurt you. I love you, Mark. I do. But I was afraid. I thought you'd leave me. I couldn't lose our family. I couldn't lose everything we built. Mark's anger swirled with the confusion, and it felt like a war inside him. Part of him wanted to walk away, to leave her, to leave everything behind. He couldn't help it. His heart was shattered. But another part of him, the part that had spent years loving Jasmine, still wanted to believe that this was just a mistake, that she hadn't meant to hurt him this way. The reality was that he didn't know what to believe anymore. He took a deep breath and sat down across from her. The silence between them was heavy, thick with the weight of everything that had been said, everything that was left unsaid. Mark's mind began to race with all the possible questions, all the emotions flooding through him. How could Jasmine have been with Derek Stone? How could she have let him into their lives, into their future? And if Derek was the father, what did that mean for his relationship with Tyler and Emily? Do they know? Mark asked, his voice strained, as he wiped his hand across his face. Jasmine shook her head, her tears still falling. No, they don't know, Mark. I've never told them. They've always known you as their dad. And I didn't want to ruin that. I didn't want them to grow up thinking they weren't yours. Mark's chest tightened. The children he had loved for years, the children he had taught to ride bikes and helped with their homework, the children who had called him Dad. They didn't even know the truth. Would they understand? Would they forgive him for not knowing, for being a part of a lie? Jasmine, "What are we supposed to do now?" Mark asked, the words coming out in a whisper. "How do I even begin to fix this? To fix us?" Jasmine looked at him with desperation in her eyes. "I don't know, Mark. I don't know. But I'm willing to do anything. I love you, and I love Tyler and Emily. I want to make things right. I just need you to give me a chance." Mark's heart was torn in two. He wanted to believe her. He wanted to believe that their family wasn't over, that this was just a bump in the road, a mistake that could be forgiven. But the truth kept pressing against him. Derek Stone wasn't just a past mistake. He was a part of their present now. And the question of whether Mark could accept that, and whether he could ever truly trust Jasmine again, lingered like a dark cloud over them both. What will Mark decide? Will he be able to forgive Jasmine, or will the past come back to haunt their future? You won't believe what happens next. Like, subscribe, and stay tuned for the next shocking twist. For hours, they sat in silence, the weight of everything hanging between them. Mark didn't know what to say, didn't know what to do. His thoughts were a jumbled mess of pain and confusion. How could he move forward from this? Could he even move forward? In the end, Mark stood up, his eyes fixed on the door. "I need time, Jasmine. I need time to think. I can't make any decisions right now." Jasmine didn't stop him as he walked away. She knew this wasn't a decision that could be rushed. She knew that Mark's heart was broken, and she didn't know if it could ever be fixed. Mark left the room, leaving Jasmine alone in the silence. He walked out of the house, his mind a storm of emotions. He needed to figure out what came next, but one thing was clear: everything had changed. His relationship with Jasmine, with Tyler and Emily, with the life they had built, it was all up in the air now. And no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't stop the truth from crashing down on him. Days passed after Mark's confrontation with Jasmine. The house, once filled with laughter and the hustle of family life, now felt eerily quiet. Mark had hardly spoken to Jasmine since that night. Every time he tried to focus on his work, to step back into the world where he was in control, his mind wandered back to the shocking revelation. Tyler and Emily, his kids, were not his biological children. The weight of that fact was a constant pressure on his chest, and he couldn't seem to shake it. The love he had for them, the joy they had brought him over the years, it all felt like a lie, like a dream that was suddenly out of reach. Jasmine gave him space. She had stopped trying to convince him to forgive her, and instead, she spent her time in quiet reflection, regretting the mistake that had fractured everything. She loved Mark deeply, and watching him struggle, watching the distance grow between them, was more painful than anything she had ever felt. She knew the damage was done, but she couldn't bring herself to walk away. She had built a life with Mark, raised a family with him, and she couldn't bear the thought of losing him. Mark, on the other hand, was in turmoil. The love he had for Jasmine and their children kept him from completely walking away, but the betrayal still stung. He had spent so many years believing in the perfection of his family, believing that everything was how it should be. And now, everything had come crashing down. He couldn't deny his feelings for Tyler and Emily. They were still his children, no matter what the DNA test had revealed. He had loved them since they were babies. He had taught them to ride bikes, helped them with their homework, been there for every scraped knee and every tear. They had called him Dad from the moment they could speak. Mark knew in his heart that no test could change the bond they shared. But how could he look at them the same way again? How could he reconcile the love he felt for them with the truth about their biological father? The days were long and filled with difficult decisions. Mark found himself standing in the kitchen one morning, staring at the family photo on the fridge. It was an old picture from a summer vacation. Jasmine, Tyler, Emily, and Mark, together, smiling. They looked so happy, so perfect. It seemed like a lifetime ago. He felt a sharp pang in his chest as he studied the picture, a reminder of what had been lost, what had been taken from him without his knowing. Tyler and Emily were still blissfully unaware of the storm that had shaken their family. They still ran to greet him after school, still held his hand when they walked to the park, still called him Dad without question. They didn't know the truth, and Mark wasn't sure if he could ever tell them. How could he explain to them that everything they had known about their family was built on a lie? One evening, after a long day of thinking, Mark decided to take a step toward healing. He had to confront the truth, whatever it was, and figure out what was best for his family. Jasmine was sitting on the couch, flipping through a magazine, her face drawn and tired. She looked up when Mark entered the room, and for a moment, neither of them said anything. It was a heavy silence, thick with the weight of the past few days. Then Mark spoke. "Jasmine, I've been thinking a lot about everything," he began, his voice quieter than usual. "About you, about the kids, about us. And I know I'm angry. I know I feel betrayed. But I also know something else." Jasmine looked at him, waiting for him to continue, her heart pounding in her chest. "I love Tyler and Emily," Mark said, his voice steady, but there was a quiet intensity in it. "They're my kids. They've always been my kids. No DNA test can change that. But I can't pretend that I'm not hurt. I can't pretend that this doesn't feel like a lie. A lie that you kept from me for years, and I need you to know that." Jasmine nodded, her eyes filled with understanding and regret. "I know, Mark. I know. I never wanted to hurt you. I was terrified that you would leave me if you knew the truth. But I see now that I should have told you. You had a right to know." Mark took a deep breath and sat down beside her. He didn't know where to start, or even what to say. This was uncharted territory for him, and the road ahead wasn't going to be easy. "I don't know if I can forgive you right away, Jasmine. This is going to take time. A lot of time. But I want to try. I want to rebuild this. For the kids, for our family." Jasmine's tears fell freely now, and she reached out to hold his hand. "Thank you, Mark. I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'll do whatever it takes to earn it. I don't want to lose you. I can't lose our family." Mark squeezed her hand gently, his heart heavy, but also full of a small glimmer of hope. This was the beginning. Not of an easy road, but of one that could eventually lead to healing. The truth was out, and now it was up to them to rebuild their family, brick by brick. The next few days were filled with difficult conversations. Mark spent more time with the kids, trying to focus on their needs, trying to push aside the storm in his heart. Jasmine, too, worked hard to rebuild the trust that had been broken. She was patient with Mark, knowing he needed time. She had no illusions about how much damage had been done, but she also knew she couldn't give up. She couldn't let their family fall apart, not without fighting for it. Mark continued to struggle with his emotions. There were moments when the weight of the betrayal felt unbearable, when the past seemed like it was suffocating him. But then there were moments, too, when he looked at Tyler and Emily, when he saw the love in their eyes, and he knew he couldn't walk away. They were his children. They always had been, and no matter what, he would be there for them. One evening, Mark sat down with Tyler and Emily at the dinner table. Jasmine was in the kitchen, preparing their meal, and the house was filled with the familiar sounds of their family life. Mark looked at Tyler, who was talking excitedly about his day at school, and at Emily, who was quietly drawing on a piece of paper. "Hey, you two," Mark said, his voice soft but filled with emotion. "I want you to know something. No matter what happens, no matter what's going on, I'm your dad, and nothing will ever change that." Tyler looked up at him, his face lighting up with a smile. "We know, Dad." Emily nodded enthusiastically. "We love you, Daddy." Mark's heart swelled with emotion. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing for sure. His love for Tyler and Emily would never change. They were his children, and no test or past mistake could ever take that away. As the days passed, Mark and Jasmine continued to work on their marriage, and Mark found himself slowly rebuilding the trust that had been broken. They went to therapy together, worked on communicating more openly, And slowly but surely, they began to heal. Their love wasn't perfect, and the pain of the past would always be there, but they were willing to fight for it, for their family. And through it all, Mark learned one of life's hardest lessons. Love isn't about perfection. It's about choosing to stay, choosing to fight, even when everything seems impossible. Love is about forgiveness, growth, and working together to build something stronger than before. And that's exactly what he was going to do. For Jasmine, for Tyler, for Emily, for his family. The road to healing was long and full of unexpected twists. Mark had been through a whirlwind of emotions over the past few weeks. Anger, betrayal, confusion, and fear. At times, he felt like he was drowning in the weight of the truth. But as each day passed, as each conversation with Jasmine and the kids unfolded, he began to see a path forward. It wasn't easy, and it wouldn't happen overnight. But Mark was starting to realize something he hadn't fully understood before. Love isn't about having all the answers, or even about never making mistakes. It's about choosing to fight for the people you care about, no matter how painful or difficult the journey might be. Jasmine, too, was doing everything she could to prove her commitment to their family. She didn't expect Mark to forgive her right away, but she was determined to show him that she was willing to put in the work. She spent more time with Tyler and Emily, focusing on the small moments that made their family life feel normal again. She knew it would take time for Mark to trust her again, but she was patient, never rushing him, and always offering her love and support. The therapy sessions they attended together were tough but necessary. Mark didn't know if he could ever fully forgive Jasmine for keeping such a massive secret from him, but with every session, he began to understand her fears, her motivations, and the deep love she had for him. He began to see that the woman he had married wasn't perfect. She had made mistakes, big ones, but she was still the person he had fallen in love with. She was still the woman who had stood by his side through everything, who had supported him in ways no one else could. As time passed, the emotional scars from the betrayal began to heal, albeit slowly. Mark and Jasmine learned to communicate better, to share their fears and their hopes with one another. They spent more time together, just the two of them, talking about their past, their present, and the future they hoped to build. They knew the road ahead wasn't going to be easy. There would always be moments of doubt, moments when the pain would resurface. But there was also hope. Hope that they could rebuild their relationship, hope that they could rebuild their family. Mark's relationship with Tyler and Emily, however, didn't need rebuilding. The love he had for them was unshakable. He had raised them, cared for them, and loved them since the moment they were born. The truth about their biological father didn't change the way he felt about them. He was still their dad, no matter what, and that was a bond that nothing could break. Every day, he saw in their eyes the trust and love they had for him. And in return, he gave them everything he had. He wasn't perfect, and neither was his family. But he was learning that perfection wasn't necessary. What mattered was the love they shared and the memories they created together. One evening, as Mark sat at the dinner table with Jasmine, Tyler, and Emily, he realized just how much they had come through together. The house still wasn't the same as it had been before. The air was heavier with the weight of the past, but it was also filled with something else. Hope. Hope that they could find a way to move forward, to heal, and to rebuild their life, piece by piece. Tyler was telling Mark about his day at school, and Emily was giggling over something silly, while Jasmine looked at them both with a proud smile. Mark caught Jasmine's eye, and for the first time in a while, he didn't feel the weight of betrayal. He saw in her eyes the same love he had always seen. She was there. She was trying. And that, in itself, was worth something. "Dad, are you going to help me with my science project?" Tyler asked, breaking Mark from his thoughts. Mark smiled and ruffled his son's hair. "Of course, buddy. You can count on me." As he looked around the table, Mark realized that while the journey ahead would not be easy, it was one he was willing to take. Because family wasn't just about blood or perfect moments. It was about choosing to stay, to love, and to fight for the people you cared about. He had made a promise to himself and to his family that no matter what had happened in the past, he would be there for them. No secrets, no lies, just love. Mark knew there were still challenges ahead, but now, for the first time in a long time, he felt something he hadn't felt in weeks. Peace. He was ready to face whatever came next, together, as a family. As the sun set on their quiet evening, Mark knew that their story wasn't finished. It was far from over. There would be more moments, more twists and turns along the way. But in that moment, as he sat with his family, he felt a sense of calm. Because no matter what life threw their way, they had each other. And that was enough. What do you think? Will Mark and Jasmine continue to rebuild their family? Or will the scars from the past continue to haunt them? The journey might be far from over, and we're sure the next chapter holds more surprises. Like, share, and subscribe to see what happens next in this unforgettable emotional journey. Thank you all for watching.